What a beautiful nigun. That one is called Nigun Heshek, right? Heshek. Nigun Heshek from Eitan Katz, Rabbi Eitan Katz. It's a beauty and a great way to kick off a busy daf. This one is very full. Yesterday's was full in a different way. Tonight we've got some beautiful and dramatic teachings. Let's light up the darkness. Who is going to be with us as we get it going on a Tuesday night? And before I go any further, our prayers go out to everybody in the path of this wicked winter storm in the middle of the country. Unheard of temperatures and snow all over the Midwest, as far south as Texas. Power outages in the midst of freezing cold weather. People are in danger. Please, God, spare everybody, save everybody. We should hear no bad news, please, God, of people hurt by this devastating storm. And as always, we also ask God, heal everyone who is suffering from COVID. May this plague pass quickly. May this weather system pass quickly. And may we only hear good news. And we say amen. Who is with us as we do some learning? Paula in Chicago, Yehuda in South Carolina, Samantha says shalom everyone, Stephen in New Hampshire, James in Indy, Renee in Indy, Melissa in Great Neck, Lucy in Minnesota, Paula with the nice flower emoji, Tom in Pennsylvania, Benjamin Vuta says shalom, John in Sedona, Hillary in Cincinnati, Bill is in LA. Wow. Welcome back to California, Bill. Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey. Dorothy says shalom. Rabbi Nancy in North Carolina. Paula says shalom. Catherine in Reading, PA. Loretta and Harold, I know, in Oregon. Erin says hello, Salanina and everyone. Dorothy's in Pennsylvania. Erin says shalom. Ann in Merced. Maria says shalom. Bernally with the nice emojis. A lot of people saying amen to our prayer. Beautiful. And Wilson Moorhead is greeting the Weissmans in Los Angeles and Norfolk. Very good, Wilson. You're one step ahead of me, as I'll show in a moment. Jojo says good morning. Jonas in Alabama. Lawrence says shalom to everybody. Over there on the YouTube side, Gigi with us in British Columbia. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by Eric Weissman, our dear friend Eric Weissman here in Los Angeles, and his wife Julie, sponsoring today's class in honor of Eric's dad, Michael Weissman's. That's Michael Ben Moshe Laser, who's celebrating a birthday today. And I know that Michael Weissman is learning with his Daf Yomi group in Virginia. So we're sending you all a big AT hug. And Michael, may the merit of our learning to you, may the merit of our learning tonight in our class and across the world and continents accrue to your merit, which is already so sizable. I know that because your family is amazing, your son is amazing, your grandson and your granddaughter are amazing. You've done a terrific job transmitting Judaism and Jewish values down through the generations in your family. Yasher Koach. And may you keep learning and transmitting values to 120. And we say amen. And Eric, may you and Julie and your kids and your whole family and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say amen. Where are we holding? This is Daf Pei Zion, page 87 here in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud, the laws of Passover. Today we open chapter 8 with Mishna number 1 of chapter 8. This chapter, we already talked many times about the fact that the only people who can eat the Paschal lamb, the Passover offering, first of all, we can only do that when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. So it's been a couple thousand years since we've had this opportunity. But when the temple is standing in Jerusalem and we can bring the Passover offering, as we are commanded to do in the Torah, still it may only be eaten. Only those people may fulfill their obligation of eating a piece of the Paschal lamb who are registered to a particular lamb. As we've said many times in this tractate, you had a group of people who arranged and agreed in advance to be part of a group that would share the paschal offering. The lamb, or a goat, young goat, it would be slaughtered in the temple, brought there by an agent of this group. It would be slaughtered. The priest would receive a little bit of the blood, walk it over to the altar, sprinkle on the altar. Then our agent, our representative, would bring the lamb back and we would roast it whole. And who would eat it? The members of our group. This chapter 8 is going to take a closer look at, okay, what does that mean, the members of a group? What if one person somehow gets included in two groups? And that can happen in various ways. Can he then choose? Does he lose his opportunity altogether? Who is going to be included? Are we going to make a distinction between a free person and an enslaved person? Are there going to be differences for men or for women? All kinds of nuances to defining who is a member of this group who's going to get to partake of the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb. Let's get into it. There's actually a lot. As always, we don't cover the whole daf in our class, so we can go in a little deeper in certain sections. But this page has such rich teachings that we are going to end up covering a fair amount of it. So let's get to it. Let me arrange that. Okay, Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 8. When she is living in her husband's house, if her husband slaughtered the paschal lamb on her behalf, and her father also slaughtered the paschal lamb on her behalf, she should eat from her husband's lamb because it is assumed that the wife intended to be included in her husband's group. Right? So what happens is here, people have to agree to be part of a group, but in certain situations, like a person can just assume that his children are going to be included in his group, certainly his minor children. Well, what if a woman, when she's still pretty young, goes out of her father's house and gets married, but he still has the habit of including her in his group. Now she's been included in two groups. Which one is she going to go with? So here the Mishnah opens by saying we make an assumption that now that she's married, she's going to want to be included in her husband's group. And so even though her father might have had in mind to include her in his group, really she was thinking to be included in her husband's group. However, if, as was often customary in those days, in those times, in those places, she went on the first festival following her marriage to observe the festival in her father's house, then if both her husband slaughtered the paschal lamb on her behalf and her father also slaughtered the paschal lamb on her behalf, she may eat it in whichever place she wishes, since it is not obvious with whose group she intended to be included. So we can be a little bit reminded of when an American college student, right, finally leaves his parents' house after graduating high school, goes to college, and that first Thanksgiving, if they're within a few hundred miles, very often they'll drive back home and celebrate Thanksgiving with their family. And that's that first time back after living independently, for a few months after growing up in their house. And now they come back to celebrate the holiday in their parents' house. Likewise, this young woman who got married, now she's going to leave her parents' house and live in her husband's house, which may really be part of her husband's father's household, right? Maybe he has like another house attached to his own parents' house, but she's leaving really the village of her father, and she's going to go and live in the village of her husband, nearby her father-in-law, etc., in the home of her father, and she's homesick. And so that first Pesach, it was a custom, a tradition, that very often these young brides would go home to her parents' house to celebrate that first Passover and be part of their household. Particularly when all the people are making that pilgrimage up to Jerusalem. That's where the Paschal Lamb is being eaten. They're all up in Jerusalem. Nevertheless, she might leave the cluster of her husband and his family to go rejoin her own family on that first Passover, which seems to have been a typical custom in that time and place. In the case of an orphan with multiple guardians, if each of his guardians apotropsin, where's this? Apoitroipsin, right? Apoitroipsin slaughtered a Paschal lamb on his behalf, intending that he be included in their group. He may eat in whichever place he wishes, right? So an orphan doesn't have his own parents, who would be assumed that he would definitely be in their group. The orphan was brought up with multiple legal guardians. They all thought to include him in their group. Now he's been included in different groups. Okay, he can only really be part of one group since they slaughtered on his behalf, thinking that he would be included in their group. So the Mishnah says he can choose which of those legal guardians, which of their groups he's going to join. A slave jointly owned by two partners may not eat from the lamb of either of them unless it was stipulated beforehand from whose lamb he will partake. All right, so slavery was a fact of life 2,000 years ago. It had not been done away with. The Torah certainly did come and give rights to slaves. But it didn't do away with the nearly universal practice of slavery in those days. It just made it somewhat kinder and safer for the slaves. But I mean, slavery is slavery. We're not going to, belittle the horrors of slavery here. Nevertheless, we still have to ascertain the legalities of this situation. So if a slave was owned by two partners, right? So then, interesting, a slave jointly owned by two partners may not eat from the lamb of either of them unless it was stipulated beforehand from whose lamb he will partake. He doesn't have his own choice, and they should have stipulated which one it was. When does he start to have his own choice? One who is half slave and half free man may not eat from his master's lamb. Why? Because it is assumed that the master did not intend to allow this person's free half to partake of the lamb, and therefore the master did not slaughter the lamb with him in mind. The master would assume that since he is half free, he will take advantage of that and join a group with the half that is his to do that with. How would a person end up half slave, half free? Could happen in two ways. Maybe he had two masters that were partners. One of them died and gave him his freedom in his will, as it were. Or maybe the master was allowing the slave to buy himself out of slavery, and he was halfway done in sort of paying the money that would eventually purchase his freedom. So in that situation where he's half slave and half free, it's assumed that it's his free side will choose, and we would not assume that his master included him in that group. And so here, they're using slaves and the new bride to get at the more underlying principle, which is, do we have cause to assume from the factual circumstances of this person's relationship to two groups, do we have reason to make a valid assumption that he intended to be part of one group over the other? In a situation where it's ambiguous which group he or she is part of, do we have a good reason to make an assumption? No, he must have intended to be part of that group, and therefore he should be part of that group, because we want this person to be able to partake if at all possible. So really what this is about is, do we have a basis for making a legal assumption? Very good. And so consequently, the half slave is not included among those registered for his master's offering unless he was explicitly included, right? So we're overcoming a lack of an explicit determination of which group this person belongs to. When there is no explicit determination, we're looking for a valid reason to make an assumption so that we can assign this person to one group or the other. I'm going to skip this opening paragraph, which is about retroactive clarification, except to say that is a concept that the sages never came to full agreement on. So can we say, that when the person didn't choose when they were supposed to choose, and then later ended up in one place, and then we say, well, since that's where he ended up, retroactively it's clarified that that's where he intended to be all along. That's not a universally accepted principle among the sages, and that's a little bit of the argument of the first paragraph. Now we continue with the Gemara raising a contradiction in the Mishnah itself. The Gemara raises a contradiction between the ruling in the Mishnah, I'm sorry, not in the Mishnah itself, but between a ruling in the Mishnah and a parallel ruling in a Baraisa, contemporaneous ruling with the Mishnah, slightly less authoritative. The Baraisa states, a woman on the first festival following her marriage eats from her father's paschal lamb. From here on, if she wishes, she eats from her father's lamb, and if she wishes, she eats from her husband's lamb. Whereas the Mishnah teaches that after the first festival, she eats exclusively with her husband, and the Baraisa teaches that she may continue to choose. Right? In the Mishnah, it seems, well, we have a cause to be unsure about the first year, because it was a custom to often go back to the father's house. It was unclear. But after that, she's always going to go with the husband. According to the Baraisa, even after the first year, she could continue to choose because maybe she lives with her husband all year, but she's going to spend Passover with her father's family. Which is it? The Gemara proceeds to say, La Kasha, this is not difficult. There, the Baraisa is referring to the case of a woman who eagerly hurries, as one who is pursued, right? She's going so quickly, she's eager, right? She's eager to go to her father's house. It is therefore reasonable that even after the first year of her marriage, she still wishes to be included in her father's group. However, over here, the Mishnah is referring to the case of a woman who is not eager. She doesn't seem like someone who is chaste in her eagerness to go to her father's house, and it is therefore presumed she wishes to be included in her husband's group. So what we're really looking at here is the relationship that this daughter sort of continues to have with her father and her father's family, the family that she grew up with. Some women, as soon as they get a chance, to marry the husband and become part of this new clan, that's where they want to be. And some women, they marry the husband, okay, but their heart hasn't fully transferred there. She's still really, anytime she gets a chance, she'd love to be around her family that she grew up with. So since we can tell what sort of relationship a woman has with her family, her own family, her birth family versus her husband's family, if she's the kind that would really love to spend time with her birth family, we assume she wants to be with her birth family. If she's the kind that really is happy to be with her husband's family and is not in a hurry to go back home with her birth family, we assume she wants to be with her husband's family. Just simple human nature. There is a homiletic interpretation of verses that conveys a similar idea. As it is written, I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers. Then I was in his eyes as one who finds peace. This is from Song of Songs, chapter 8, verse 10. And Rabbi Yochanan said about this verse, she is like a bride who was found perfect. She was warmly received in her father-in-law's house, and she eagerly hurries as one pursued to go tell of her praise, i.e. her warm welcome in her father's house, right? So Rabbi Yochanan is saying, he's painting a very beautiful picture where, she grew up in the loving arms of her family. She misses them. But when she married her husband, she was really welcomed into the loving embrace of her husband and his whole family. And so she's happy in both places. And what she wants to do, she's anxious to go home, tell her parents, her birth family, you know what? You don't have to worry about me. I'm so lucky. I found a great husband, and he has a great family, and they're treating me warmly, and I know that you wanted to hear that. So she wants to go and tell her birth family that. As it is written, and it shall be on that day, says the Lord, that you shall call me my husband, and shall call me no more my master. This is a line from Hosea, chapter 2, verse 18. As it is written, and it shall be on that day, says the Lord, that you shall call me, the Lord, my husband, and you shall no longer call me, the Lord, my master. So what is this transition reference in this line from the prophet Hosea that God is saying to the people that a day will come when the people start to call God their husband rather than their master? What is this about? And Rabbi Yochanan said She shall be like a bride in her father-in-law's house, where she experiences a close relationship with her husband. And she shall not be like a bride during the betrothal period, living in her father's house, during which time her relationship with her husband has still not developed, right? So when she goes essentially from her father's house to her father-in-law's house, what really happens is that she forms a beautiful new but exquisite relationship with her husband that should, last for an eternity. The two of them are soulmates reunited. That's how Rabbi Yochanan reads this line from Hosea. Now that we've brought down this line from Hosea, I'm going to skip a few paragraphs to continue this discussion about the prophet Hosea. So apropos the verse from Hosea, the Gemara interprets additional verses there. So Hosea 1:1 opens like this. The word of the Lord that came unto Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judea. And in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. So the sages explained, 4 prophets prophesied in one era, and the oldest of them was Hosea. We get that from Hosea 1:2, indicating that Hosea was the first of these prophets. If not, the question would arise, and was it with Hosea that the Lord spoke first of all the prophets? Weren't there many prophets who lived and prophesied during the period from Moses until Hosea? Rather, Rabbi Yochanan said he was the first of the 4 prophets who prophesied during that period, and these are the 4, Hosea, Isaiah, Amos, and Micha. All right, Hosea, Isaiah, Amos, and Micha. Isaiah, the most famous certainly of those prophets. We quote Isaiah all the time. But Hosea, Isaiah, Amos, and Micha were contemporaneous prophets prophesying in the same era. And Hosea was the oldest of them, or at least the one who received prophecy first. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Hosea, your sons, by which God meant the Jewish people, have sinned. Now Hosea should have said to God in response, but they are your sons. They are the sons of your beloved ones, the sons of Abraham, of Yitzhak, of Yaakov. Extend your mercy over them, right? God says to Hosea, the Jewish people are sinning terribly, right? He calls them your sons. Now, this is before Hosea has sons. That's how we know that when God says to him, your sons, he means the entire Jewish people. And so now the Gemara, right, the sages say, Hosea should have said to him, what do you mean my sons? They're your sons. They're the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we always want to, say to God, when you think of us as the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because they were so good and holy and had tremendous merit. And even though we, their descendants, have fallen so low and we've become such sinners, be merciful and compassionate to us in the merit of our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that's what Hosea should have said to God when God said, your sons, meaning the Jewish people, are sinning. Not only, and so he should have said, they're your sons, the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, extend your mercy over them. That's what Hosea should have said to God. But not only did he fail to say that, instead, he said before God, Master of the universe, the entire world is yours. Since Israel has sinned, exchange them for another nation. Right? Like Hosea did not have our back. Hosea said, look, you can pick any people you want to be your people. If this people is utterly failing in living up to the covenant between you and the Jewish people, maybe you should select another people to be your people. That's what Hosea seems to have said in his youth when he first received prophecy from the Lord. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, what shall I do with this elder? So I guess he wasn't so young at this time. What shall I do to this elder but elder with a capital E, meaning one of the leaders of the Jewish people. What shall I do to this elder who does not know how to defend Israel? I will say to him, go and take a prostitute and bear for yourself children of prostitution. And after that, I will say to him, send her away from before you. If he is able to send her away, I will also send away the Jewish people. This deliberation, right, in the Lord's mind, as it were, provides the background of the opening prophecy in Hosea, as it is stated in Hosea 1, verse 2. The Lord said to Hosea, go take for yourself a wife of prostitution and children of prostitution. And then it is written, Hosea 1:3, the next verse, so he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim. Hosea 1:3. And the sages interpreted her name homiletically, Gomer. Rav said she was so called because everyone would finish Gomerim, having relations with her and satisfy their desires with her. That somehow her name alludes to the fact that her profession was being a prostitute. And the daughter of Diblaim, her father's name, the name Diblaim, can be taken as the dual form of Diba, ill repute. It suggests that she was a woman of ill repute. Diblaim is not her father, it's her mother. And so it suggests that she was a woman of ill repute, the daughter of a woman of ill repute. And Shmuel said, the name Diblaim is the plural of the word devela, a cake of pressed figs, indicating that she was as sweet as a cake of pressed figs, and that's why everybody came to use her services. Rabbi Yochanan, based on a similar derivation, said the name signifies that everyone would tread dashin upon her, a euphemism for sexual relations, like a cake of pressed figs. Alternatively, with regard to the name Gomer, Rabbi Yehuda said the name can be understood as deriving from the root gamar, to finish. It alludes to the fact that the Gentiles sought to finish the money of the Jewish people in her days. Nothing to do with her, but just in this era. This was an era when Hosea was prophesying and marrying this woman Gomer. It was during that time that the foreign nations pressed the Jewish people very hard, not so much with war, but they were able to exert pressure and kind of extort all their money from them. Rabbi Yochanan said, they did not seek to do so, and still they were successful. They plundered and finished it, as it is stated, for the king of Aram destroyed them and made them like the dust in threshing. That's 2 Kings 13:7. The passage in Hosea continues, and she conceived. Right, so we got a little bit of background about why she might have had this name and what was going on in this time period. But the narrative is going to continue with what was Hosea's life like after God spoke to him and said that the people have sinned and he didn't defend the Jewish people. A prophet should be a defender of the Jewish people, in the same way that Abraham, not even for the sake of the Jewish people, argued with God when God said he's going to destroy the sinners in Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham said, well, what if there's some righteous people there? You're going to kill everybody together. How much more Abraham, who wasn't even talking about his own people, how much more, although he was thinking of his nephew Lot, who was in Sodom, how much more should a prophet of the Jewish people defend the Jewish people when God says they've really gone astray? And so then God said, this guy doesn't even stand up for them. I'm going to teach him a lesson. And so God commanded Hosea to marry a prostitute. Now we're going to see why. The passage in Hosea continues, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, right, the parents don't get a choice of what they're going to name the son. God says to Hosea, call your son's name Jezreel, for soon I will visit the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and will obliterate the kingdom of the house of Israel. And she conceived again and bore a daughter. And he said to him, call her name Loi Ruhama, for I will no more have compassion upon the house of Israel, that I should bear them. And she conceived and bore a son. And he said, call his name Loi Ami, for you are not my people, and I will not be yours. Lo ami, not my people. After 2 sons and 1 daughter had been born to him, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Hosea, shouldn't you have learned from the example of your master Moses, who, once I spoke with him, separated from his wife, right? So we have that teaching, and that this was something that Moses' brother and sister, especially his sister Miriam and Aaron, were commenting on, that maybe Moses was doing wrong. God spoke to Moses so often that Moses never knew when God was going to speak to him next. Because of that, Moses wanted to always be in a state of tahara, a ritual purity. When a husband and wife, have physical relations together, so then after having an emission, a seminal emission, the man would be tameh and he'd have to immerse in a mikveh and then await nightfall and then be tahor, ritually pure again. He'd be tameh until nightfall. But Moses didn't want to keep God waiting, since a prophet could only receive prophecy when he's in a state of tahara, ritual purity. Moses just separated from his wife and didn't have relations with her anymore, so that he would always be ready to receive prophecy from the Lord on behalf of the Jewish people. So now God is saying to Hosea, hey, why aren't you're a prophet, why aren't you acting like Moses and separating yourself from your wife so that you're always ready to receive prophecy? Shouldn't you have learned from the example of your master Moses, who, once I spoke with him, separated from his wife? You too, separate yourself from your wife. Hosea said to him, Master of the universe, I have sons from her, and I am unable to dismiss her or to divorce her, right? He's saying, if I'm going to separate myself from her and not have conjugal relations with her, then I won't be fulfilling my obligations toward my wife. A husband is obligated to provide his wife pleasure when she wants it. If he's not going to fulfill his obligation, she has grounds for divorce from him. He's not being a good husband. So he said, I don't want to lose my wife. We have children together, and it's also implied that he loves her. Even though she came from prostitution, he's really fallen in love with her, and he loves his children, and he wants to keep this family together. In response to Hosea's show of loyalty to his family, the Holy One, blessed be he, rebuked him and said to him, just as you, whose wife is a prostitute, and your children from her are children of prostitution, and you do not even know if they are yours or if they are children of other men, despite this, you are still attached to them and will not forsake them. So too, I, God, am still attached to the Jewish people who are my sons and the sons of my faithful who withstood ordeals, the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are so special that they are one of the 4 acquisitions that I have acquired in my world. So God is now going to list the 4 dearest things that he has acquired in this world, and he's going to count the Jewish people among his 4 dearest acquisitions. But the point is, he's teaching Hosea this lesson, right? You told me at the beginning I should just dump the Jewish people and go find a better people to be my children. Now I've taught you the lesson. You could have, I told you to marry a prostitute and have children with her. You could have easily resented that and just, never formed any kind of warm attachment to them. But you created a family. You formed a home. These are your children that you raised. They might not even be truly your children, since she was a prostitute, and I guess maybe even continued her ways of prostitution. And yet he becomes attached to the family and doesn't want to let go of them. And likewise, says God, these Jewish people who have wandered away from me and who have committed idolatry, which is likened unto prostitution and adultery, right? That the Jewish people should only love God and be attached to God, and yet they allow themselves, at least some of them, to go worship idols and other gods and the gods of others, and just the worst, lowest stuff that is so akin to adultery in God's eyes. And nevertheless, just as Hosea became attached to his wife, the prostitute, and his children of prostitution, similar, God is attached to the Jewish people. And even when they go off committing, chasing other gods, God feels love for the Jewish people. That's the lesson he's teaching Hosea here. And now he says that the children of Israel are one of the 4 acquisitions that I acquired in my world. The Gemara proceeds to enumerate all four. Torah is one acquisition. As it is written, the Lord acquired me as the beginning of his way. That's Proverbs 8:22, right? So it's so interesting. Torah, this is the voice of the Torah, the personified voice of the Torah saying, the Lord acquired me as the beginning of his way. Heaven and earth are another acquisition, heaven and earth together, a kinyan, as it is written, blessed be Abram of God Most High, creator, in this case, translating creator, but kone, the one who acquires heaven and earth. So God acquired heaven and earth, right? So Torah is likened to the entire heaven and earth, meaning like the universe, the physical universe. And the holy temple is one acquisition, as it is written, and he brought them to his sacred border, to this mountain, which his right hand had acquired. That's Psalms 78:54. So paying special attention to the temple as this axis mundi, right? The place where heaven and earth meet is the temple, when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. And finally, the fourth one is the Jewish people. The Jewish people are one acquisition, as it is written, the nation that you have acquired. That's at Exodus 15:16. And now you, Hosea, said that I should replace them with another nation? Really, Hosea? Once Hosea realized that he had sinned, he got up to request that God have compassion upon him for having spoken ill of the Jewish people. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, before you request compassion upon yourself because you maligned the Jewish people, because you spoke badly of the Jewish people, right? So Hosea is asking to be forgiven. He says, please forgive me. Please have compassion on me. I should not have slandered the Jewish people. And God says to Hosea, okay, so you want to be forgiven. You want compassion for yourself, right? So interesting, right? You think that the best thing that somebody could do when they've done wrong is apologize. But God is saying, before you apologize and ask for compassion upon yourself, there's something else you need to do. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, before you request compassion upon yourself, first request compassion upon the Jewish people, since I have already decreed upon them 3 harsh decrees on your account in response to your condemnation of them. Incredible, right? So Hosea would receive prophecy. A prophet is somebody that God chooses and elevates. And once they've elevated to that position, they can make mistakes. They can lose their status as prophet. They can do that. But while they're prophets, while they're that kind of leader invested with a divine power that God grants to them, I mean, they're not godly power, but God gives them the power of a prophet. While they have that power, it's a tremendous responsibility. And when he, as a prophet, even when speaking to God and being scolded for speaking in this way, nevertheless, he spoke and he slandered the Jewish people. It wasn't just that God said, you're wrong and you shouldn't have done that. I'm going to punish you and I'm going to teach you a lesson by giving you this whole family situation with marrying a prostitute. In addition to all of that, the fact is, when Hosea spoke those words, they had an effect, right? Our leaders' words have consequences. So, before you ask for compassion for yourself, you need to ask for compassion for the Jewish people, because I, God, have already decreed upon them three harsh decrees on your account in response to your condemnation of them. There is an allusion to these 3 decrees in the names of the children born of the prostitute, right? God told him what to name his 3 children, and these were 3 decrees from the Lord in the form of these children's names, but that would actually have a negative effect on the Jewish people. Jezreel is an allusion to a decree for Jehu's actions in the Jezreel Valley. You can see that story at 2 Kings 9 and 10, chapters 9 and 10. Lo Ruhama, I will not have compassion. That was the name of the daughter. One that had not received compassion suggests that God will no longer have compassion for the Jewish people. And Lo Ami, not my people, indicates that the Jewish people will no longer be considered God's people. Right? So the fact that Hosea made those negative statements when he was there to be in the role of the defender and he didn't stand up for the Jewish people, it had consequences. He didn't speak up for the Jewish people when he could. He wasted years of his prophecy learning the lesson that God wanted him to learn. And so now, before he asked for compassion for himself for having sinned and being wrong and all the rest, he has to recognize that the Jewish people aren't where they need to be, and he's got to get off his butt and do something about it. So he needs to start doing his job of defending and sticking up for and praying for the Jewish people. Hosea stood and requested compassion upon the Jewish people. Right now, he gave all his heart and soul with the benefit of the lessons, the hard lessons that he learned by going through this whole journey with the prostitute wife and the children of prostitution. Now his prayer, which he should have uttered earlier, the first time God told him the Jewish people had sinned, and he was chosen for prophecy. Nevertheless, you can't wallow in regret. Okay, should have prayed then, he didn't. But now he's older, wiser, his heart is much fuller, much more compassion in his own heart because he's had that tough journey. And now his prayer is very powerful. And so when he stands up and seeks compassion for the Jewish people, his prayer is answered. God nullifies those 3 decrees against the Jewish people. God responded and began to bless them, bless the Jewish people, as it is stated. And then these are going to be verses from Hosea, chapter 2, verse 1. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it will be that instead of that which was said to them, you are not my people, Lo Ami, right, the name of the third son. Instead of you are not my people, it shall be said to them, you are the children of the living God, and the children of Judea and the children of Israel shall be gathered together. Now, that's an important distinction right now, the children of Judea and the children of Israel. This is because the kingdom had already been split, right? After Solomon, his son, the next king of Israel, was such a weak king, it caused a division, a civil war, and then we had Judea, which includes Jerusalem, which would survive much longer, and the northern kingdom, Israel, which would fall within about 100 years and become the lost tribes of Israel when they were defeated by the king of Assyria, Sennacherib. Okay. But at least at this point now, when Hosea is prophesying, maybe those people aren't lost yet. And I will sow her to me in the land, and I will have compassion upon her that had not received compassion. And I will say to them, they were not my people, you are my people. Rabbi Yochanan said, woe to the authority which shortens the life and buries its holders. Right, so that was the end of the story of Hosea, that having gone through that whole journey, his prayers became very effective. Now, I'm not sure. I might have that time scheme wrong. I'm not sure when Hosea was prophesying whether the northern kingdom had fallen already. But the fact is, those 4 prophets, as we're going to hear about right now, they all outlived many kings. Each of them was prophesying during the reign of 4 different kings. And so Yochanan looks at that factoid and says, yeah, authority shortens people's lives. You can survive longer as a prophet than as a king. So Rabbi Yochanan says, woe to authority, which shortens the life and buries those who hold authority. This is evident from the fact that you don't have any prophet who did not outlast 4 kings in his lifetime, as the king's position of authority caused them to die young. A prophet outliving 4 kings is demonstrated in the opening verses of Hosea, and similarly as it is stated with regard to Isaiah, the vision of Isaiah the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judea and Jerusalem in the kings of Uzziah and Jotham and Ahaz and Hezekiah. Right? So the kings of Judea. So Isaiah himself or prophesied during the reign of 4 different kings of Judea, right? So 4 kings of Judea, all prophesying. I mean, he prophesied during 4 kings. 4 kings die young, right? Authority shortens people's lives. And Rabbi Elazar said, skipping a few paragraphs here, and Rabbi Elazar said, the Holy One, blessed be he, exiled Israel among the nations. Now, this is a fascinating idea. So we're doing a few digressions here. And then once Rabbi Elazar is commenting on Hosea, we're going to go to another teaching of Rabbi Elazar. And so now this new teaching doesn't really have much to do with who gets to register for the Paschal Lamb. That's where we started. And we were talking about a line from Song of Songs, which might shed some light on whether we should assume that a newly married woman wants to join the group of her father or the group of her husband when eating the Paschal Lamb in Jerusalem. From there, that verse in Song of Songs was connected to a line in Hosea. And once we were looking at Hosea, we had this beautiful teaching on how God was irked by his prophet Hosea, that he didn't stand up as a defender of the Jewish people, and God taught him a personal lesson by forcing him into a marriage with a prostitute and having children of prostitution, and then he became attached to them, and he learned the lesson about in the same way God is attached to the Jewish people, even though they wander off and God forbid, commit idolatry and pursue other gods. Now that we've had some verses from Hosea, one of those is interpreted by Rabbi Elazar, and now we're getting another teaching. So this is a digression just based on the teaching of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said, the Holy One, blessed be he, exiled Israel among the nations. Why is there a Jewish diaspora? Why did we lose Israel and have to become the wandering Jewish people, the wanderers who were, never in their own land, but for thousands of years, just, adrift and living temporarily in other people's nations? Why did God do that? Certainly there was a punishment, right? We lost our right to live in Israel because we did not live up to the covenant and our obligations under the covenant. So we were punished. And that's why we lost the right to live in Israel when the second temple was destroyed. Nevertheless, that punishment could have taken different forms. Why were we exiled among the nations? Says Rabbi Elazar, he exiled Israel among the nations only so that converts would join them. As it is stated, a line from Hosea, and I will sow her to me in the land. So like sowing seeds, planting seeds, and I will sow her to me in the land. Does a person sow a seah of grain for any reason other than to bring in several core of grain during the harvest, right? Does anybody plant grain for any other reason than to reap much more than the amount of seed that he planted, right? So when a farmer plants a field full of grain, it's mostly for eating. Some of that grain he's going to keep to plant the following year. But when he's planting, a few sacks of seed, what does he expect to do is to collect, bushels and bushels and bushels and bushels of grain at harvest time. Says Rabbi Elazar that the Jewish people were scattered among the nations, almost like planting a seed among the nations so that they would gather more people as converts into the Jewish people when people would hear about the Torah and Judaism, Jewish wisdom, and Jewish teaching. Very interesting teaching we have here in this Gemara, because generally speaking, and you've heard it many times, the Jewish people do not proselytize. We don't go out and say, hey, become Jewish. And in fact, if a non-Jew wants to convert and become a Jew, we have a strong tradition that they go to a rabbi and the rabbi says, no, you really don't want to do that. And then the person comes back again and says, what do you want to do that for? Right now, you only have 7 commandments that you're obligated in, the Noahide commandments. If you become a Jew, you're going to be obligated in 613 mitzvahs, and if you fail to do any of them, you're a sinner. Why do you want to do that to yourself? Just be a righteous Noahide. And then if the person comes back a third time and says, I want to convert, then the rabbi begins teaching them and puts them on that path to do a proper conversion. We're not looking for converts, and we're even, sort of pushing them off a little bit to make sure that that's what they really want when they come to convert. So proselytizing or just seeking converts, it's just not something Jews do, and we see teachings about that all over the place. But here in our Gemara today, Rabbi Elazar is saying, well, the Jews may not be looking for converts, but because the Jewish people are scattered among the nations, especially when you think about ancient times when they didn't have TV and internet and you didn't know what people were doing a few nations over, now that the Jewish people are scattered all over the world, so then people all over the world are exposed to Torah. And some of them will want to join the Jewish people, and that was one of God's purposes in scattering the Jews among the lands, says Rabbi Elazar here in our Gemara. And Rabbi Yochanan said that this same idea may be derived from here. Also from Hosea, this is chapter 2, verse 25, and I will have compassion upon her that had not received compassion, and I will say to them that were not my people, you are my people. Now that's normally understood to say that God would never lose his connection to the Jewish people, and even though they turned their back on God by going and pursuing idolatry, God would, if they would atone, he would always take them back. But says Rabbi Yochanan, actually you can also learn from this verse that people who are not saying to God, I'm one of the Jewish people, will become one of the Jewish people. We could learn it out from that same verse in Hosea. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, what is the meaning of that which is written? This is Proverbs 30:10. Slander not a servant to his master, lest he curse you, and you be found guilty. Right? Don't go telling a master that his servant, there's something wrong with him. And it is then written in the next verse, there is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother. Is it because they curse their father and do not bless their mother that you should not slander them? Clearly that is absurd. So how are these two sequential verses, Proverbs 30:10 and 11, to be understood? The juxtaposition of these two verses. Rather, the juxtaposition serves to emphasize that even in a wicked generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother, right? So people who curse their parents or who even fail to bless their parents, right? They are guilty of violating the 5th commandment, which says honor your mother and father, right? Honor your parents, revere your parents. So a generation that doesn't do that, even such a generation, which is totally evil, right? People who have lost the idea of respecting and honoring their parents have set themselves up for being a generation without values, and evil will naturally ensue. They will become evil and get involved into all kinds of evil practices if they lose respect for their parents and a willingness to learn from their parents and to respect their parents and bless their parents. They lose that, they're certainly going to become an evil generation. And yet, even an evil generation like that, one should not slander a servant to his master. From where do we derive this? From Hosea, whose criticism of the Jewish people, God's servants, to God, their master, aroused God's ire, despite the fact that it was a wicked generation. See, when Hosea first heard God say, your sons have sinned, right? Meaning this is a wicked generation. Hosea agreed. Hosea was a righteous person in the midst of a wicked generation. He could look around that the Jewish people, they had an evil king, had introduced idolatry into the land. People were running after idolatry. And he had already been, disgusted with the people. He was a righteous person. That's probably why he was chosen to be a prophet. And so when God said, these people have sinned, Hosea's like, oh yeah, they're terrible. You should get yourself another people. These people have lost the right. He was so busy being a scold and a scold and a rebuker of his own people that he didn't realize that when God spoke to him and gave him a special status as a prophet, why did God do that? So that Hosea would stand up on behalf of his people, be a defender for them, and along with that, not just talk to God, but go out there and do the work and say, look, I stood up for you people. You got to live up to the way that I know you can be, rather than the way that you have been acting as a wicked generation. All right, that's what I've got for us today. Let me see if there are any comments or questions which have come in the meantime. Hold on. Sharon, but we learned from last week's Parsha, slavery, from the Hebrew, could be servitude, was also a sort of economic safety net and had a finite end of the time of service. Exactly. So we're talking about, we don't want to diminish the horror of slavery at any period in history. However, Sharon is pointing out that it is also true that slavery, as it was practiced in the world prior to the giving of Torah, was much worse than the way that the Jews were then commanded to practice slavery. First of all, with respect to Jews themselves becoming slaves, it would never be permanent. Right? It would never be permanent. It was actually just a way for somebody who fell into debt that they could sell themselves to pay off their debt. But after a certain number of years, they would go out. And the Torah says when the slave goes out, he may not go out empty-handed. Like you have to give him a little bit of a start, right? You have to give him some clothes, some basic resources, a little bit of money, so that he can now go out and fashion a new life for himself. So that kind of slavery, very different from the kind of, just torture, agonizing, just using people as chattel, the kind of slavery that existed in the world. And even with respect to enslaving enemies, after a war or something, and that the Jews might own slaves that were not Jews, there would be different rules. They would not be as protective as the rules for Jewish slaves, but they would definitely still have more rights than slaves had in the rest of the world. So the Torah didn't, just in the same way that Maimonides said, that perhaps, I don't know if this is true, Rambam said that animal sacrifice was practiced at a certain time in history. When the Torah came, it didn't just say end it, but it absolutely regulated and limited animal sacrifice in many ways. Then eventually the temple fell and we no longer practiced animal sacrifice. And Maimonides said that was the phasing out of animal sacrifice from the world. Likewise, the Torah came, it didn't completely end slavery, but it limited it in so many ways that it was definitely part of that process of phasing slavery out of existence. Of course, it would take a long time, as we all know, but still its nature had been changed in that time. And Sharon, thank you. The northern kingdom fell during Hosea's lifetime. Okay, that's why I wasn't sure if it was before or after, because it happened during Hosea's lifetime. I need to read the book of Hosea. It's about time. And finally, Renee says, so the diaspora is for the sake of the ger? Wow, mind blown. Have to sit with this. I mean, look, you can't sum up all of Jewish history and diaspora as being for simply one reason. But Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan are giving both that same teaching. That it's at least a reason. It's at least a reason that the Jews, being scattered all over the world, brought monotheistic principles and Torah to everywhere that they went. And what's fascinating is, right, before the Jewish people came, before the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, the whole world was idolatrous and pagan, many places practicing child sacrifice, all over the place worshiping multiple gods, idols, stars, sun, moon, trying to propitiate one god after another, etc. the Jewish people came, they said there is one God. And that idea started with this tiny, vulnerable people who could so easily have been wiped out of existence so many times because so many people instigated genocidal attacks on the Jewish people and tried to wipe them out. As we say at Passover, in every generation, they rise up to destroy us, but the Holy One saves us from their midst. And from this tiny little nucleus of a vulnerable people, somehow this idea that there is one God has spread, to almost every nation in the world. And it has become the dominant understanding. I think that there are more monotheistic people in the world than non-monotheistic people in the world. I'm not sure how that balances out, but, in terms of the monotheistic religions, they're pretty big in the world today. So that idea has certainly gained traction throughout the world, if we just look at the results. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow. Another fascinating page when we continue with Daf Peches, page 88, here in chapter 8. And we're generally studying who are the people that can be included in a group of people that are registered to one Korban Pesach, one Paschal lamb. All the best. Have a great night.